Beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike.
Welcome to the world of Street Fighter III. Prepare for battle.
The popular narrative that has dogged the Street Fighter III series since New Generation was first introduced in 1997 is that it recast the franchise beloved roster with a crowd of weirdos. Sci-fi aesthetics, cave-dwelling hermits, and a kill your gods plot that, while contemporary to Japanese RPG and anime enthusiasts, wasn't yet a common gaming trope in the West, meant one thing to fans of all things street and fighting. Capcom had phoned it in. Who are these kooks anyway? And damn it, were all of those stereotypes that players had come to know and maybe sadly accept. Even though I've gone out of my way to disprove this through line with the video series that you're watching, it's probably here that I reiterate that all of this is wrong-headed thinking. Yes, Sagat, Honda, and the rest could have been in this game. Maybe it would have changed New Generation and its progeny's financial fortunes around. But that wasn't the point. Sadamoto, Yasuda, and the Street Fighter III team knew what they were doing. If anything, they should enjoy a much-deserved, if retroactive, applause. Change, after all, takes a lot of guts. In a metaphoric, mechanical, and even cultural way, no character represents this change better than genteel British pugilist Dudley. In fact, it was the design team's mission from the jump. After all, the Street Fighter franchise already had a boxing character, and not to put too fine a point on it, one that was black. And to compare the two as an only reactionary from a lay perspective, it's practically encouraged by the Street Fighter III development team. In a CFN interview, New Generation producer Tomoshi Sadamoto said that when designing Dudley, they thought that boxing in the UK was, quote, a gentleman's sport. They wanted to change the image of a boxer compared to Balrog because they all, quote, seemed to be bad guys. A loaded, though fair statement. Balrog, after all, is the quintessential angry black man stereotype, with his canonically brutal boxing style and a habit of killing opponents accidentally in the ring. They all seemed like bad guys because, well, they made one an end boss in one of the biggest video games of all time. This is not Dudley. In fact, it's the polar opposite. While we took our time litigating the Capcom design staff about its poor treatment of people of African descent in Elena's episode of this series, this one quote by Sadamoto alone, and by extension, Dudley himself, stumbles into a sort of make-good. Dudley is cultured, articulate, and idly rich, and as far as this game is concerned, a complex and calculated fighter. By making him the gentleman in a gentleman's sport, Capcom effectively turned a stereotype that they helped perpetuate on its head. His perception changed. That took guts. In the same interview, Sadamoto mentions that once England came up as a place of origin, they more or less had the framework for him down from the start. In his own words, Dudley was the easiest character to finalize. In terms of a boxing cast member, this makes a large degree of sense. Though the sport has many connections to the ancient world, Wikipedia mentions that it was accepted in the Greek Olympics as early as 688 BCE, the sport of boxing as we know it today was largely codified in England beginning in the 16th century. At this point, prize fighting, as it was largely referred, were often bare-knuckle bouts with few rules other than to beat an opponent senseless, giving it the reputation of a blood sport. Without weight classes and no standardized rule sets, deaths in the ring weren't exactly rare as one might surmise. This changed in 1867 with the introduction of the Marquis of Queensberry rules, which standardized how we enjoy the sweet science today in terms of ring size, weight divisions, and round times. Though we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, you can easily make a case for Balrog and Dudley representing the pre- and post-Marquis of Queensberry rule set, even in terms of gameplay. Balrog, with his reckless rushing punches and flagrantly illegal headbutts, is perhaps one step away from biting off ears in the ring. Dudley, on the other hand, is an extremely technical character, even for a complex game like Third Strike, with his multitude of target combos and robust command movement. This is because Dudley also represents what we call the gentleman boxer character trope. If we were to simply regurgitate wikis, we'd recount fan speculation that the character is a riff on real-life contemporary English boxer Chris Eubank. The Jamaican English Eubank was an outsized personality during a storied career in the 1980s and 90s as a super middleweight, and famous for not only his skill in the ring but also his behavior outside of it, especially whenever the press was watching. He's also widely known for his personal style, sporting dandy suits, monocles, and the occasional bowler hat of past British gentry. In reality, even Eubank was part of a long line of stylized, clean-cut fighters including American gentleman Jim Corbett in the late 18 and early 1900s, Danish gentleman Chris Christensen in the 1950s and 60s, and most importantly, gentleman John Jackson, who died in 1845. Jackson, an Englishman and early bare-knuckle champion, established a gentleman's boxing academy in 1803 to teach what was then known as the scientific approach to boxing, partially inspired by past champion Daniel Mendoza. The low, loose stance and hands up in a guard position were early innovations of this method, which is what Jackson taught to local wealthy Brits, including poet Lord Byron. From a design standpoint, fans often also like to point to Freddie Mercury, lead singer to rock band Queen, as a visual influence as well, especially given the picture of the flamboyant and powerful vocalist in a tuxedo. There's likely some truth to this, as Queen enjoyed immense popularity in Japan during their run in the 1970s and 80s before Mercury's passing in 1991. As Queen was a band that frequently toured Japan when many of their contemporaries would or could not, the band, and Mercury specifically, have held a cultural fascination in the country even to this day, judging by both Japanese album sales and the gaming community's continued references to them and their work. Later designs for Dudley for Street Fighter IV have leaned into this, with DLC influenced by Mercury outfits from the We Are the Champions video and his famous Wembley Stadium concert appearance. Mercury is also likely an inspiration for sporadic Street Fighter character Eagle, one of the few that appeared beyond the first game of the series, but not as often as his castmates. Not unlike many Street Fighter characters, Dudley may also be a riff on Hirohiko Araki's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically Will Antonio Zappelli, though without the top hat and long-tailed overcoat. As Capcom is no stranger to lifting character concepts from popular culture around them, it's not a one-to-one comparison to call Dudley a Zappelli clone, but there's likely some inspiration to be found. But back to the game. While his involvement in the overall story of the Street Fighter III games is largely inconsequential, it's notable for a few reasons. First, as far as series Bible Eternal Challenge states, Dudley is in fact really, really rich, but comes from generational wealth. When his father lost his money in bad business dealings, so too when his prized Jaguar to none other than series antagonist Gil. Dudley bullies his way through the Second Impact tournament to retrieve his heirloom automobile, and his ending is the only in-game appearance of Gil's associate Colleen in the Street Fighter III games, other than fighting Gil in Third Strike's single-player arcade mode. Dudley's inclusion in Third Strike then is actually quite curious. Having achieved his goal in the previous game, his place in the cast from a story perspective is simply because he was in the previous game. While he has some rival dialogue with Ryu where they both offer some mutual respect, likely a holdover from the Street Fighter III manga of Ryu Final by Masahiko Nakahira, even his ending has little to do with the overall plot of the game or this series, as it shows another comedic scene with butler Otto K. Gotch. However, his father's car is once again important. Trading the Green Roadster from New Generation and Second Impact for his match intros for his father's Jag in Third Strike, it once again illustrates the passage of time between the two games, reminding us that Third Strike is a sequel and not simply an upgrade of the previous game's arcade board. We even see both cars in a special intro to Dudley mirror matches. Like most characters, Dudley's voice actor changed between games. Like Gil and the announcer, Dudley was voiced in New Generation and Second Impact by voice actor and apparent Oklahoma Board Sailing Association founder Bruce Robertson, who has had some truly varied work in smaller gaming roles. For Third Strike, he was played by actor Francis Dykowski, who has few listed credits on IMDb but has appeared in both live action and other voice roles. While these aren't entirely notable names, Dudley is still one of the few characters among the Street Fighter III series that never shared a voice actor with other characters. That counts for something. He's also one of the few characters across the games to have his own distinct backgrounds. The first, a London street, is interesting insomuch that it features 3 punk kids on the right side of the map that would resemble the early designs of Birdie before his evolution from Street Fighter I to the Alpha series. I would be remiss if I didn't mention what is generally accepted as the punk aesthetic, and punk rock music started in the US with garage rock bands and then Midwestern acts like the MC5 and Iggy Pop before spreading further. But the UK punk scene in the mid-1970s codified it, if it ever really could be, in the wake of the Sex Pistols, The Damned, and The Clash. For many people, punk is as synonymous with London as big hair 80s glam metal is with Los Angeles. In Third Strike, the opponent select screen simply calls this level Main Street at 11:05 a.m. It takes place in front of an actual London Underground location though, Knightsbridge Station, built in 1906. Also worth pointing out is that the upper parts of the arena are seen from a fisheye lens to force their perspective. All of the New Generation stages were this way, but other than this one background, the forced perspective was lost in the transition from Second Impact to Third Strike, and stages became more static and head-on. Like other characters in the Street Fighter III games though, one might look at Dudley and think that the design team just couldn't help themselves from a gameplay perspective. Just as with Balrog, but the opposite of Elena, he has no kicks assigned to any of his button as befitting a boxer. As the original combo monster of the Street Fighter III games though, Dudley is a character with piles of multi-hit attacks that make players adept at the parry system think twice about trying to swat away all of his moves. He has a command normal on all of his standing buttons other than light kick, meaning players must stay cognizant of their stick placement when attacking. He's also loaded down with 8 target combos, up from 5 since his introduction to New Generation. In comparison to characters like Ibuki that we've already described as perhaps over-engineered, most competitive Dudley players concur that all of these target combos have some practical, if situational, use. It's one of the more sprawling move lists in the game, and one that might look similar to a 3D fighting game like Virtua Fighter or Tekken with their deep catalog of movesets. An interview with Street Fighter III combat designer Hidetoshi Neo-Ji Ishizawa in Street Fighter 25, The Art of Street Fighter, confirms that Virtua Fighter was an influence on the New Generation design team, if maybe only subconsciously, so you can see how we might make that leap here with Dudley. With his emphasis on quick combos, mixed direction, and counter-attacking may fit the mold of a Virtua Fighter character dropped into a 2D plane. As a stray hit from Dudley might also turn into big juggle damage, another hallmark of 3D fighting games, the evidence mounts. Ishizawa himself downplays the influence of Virtua Fighter on Third Strike in the same interview, but goes into detail on how the emergence of 3D fighting games made the team spend, quote, a lot of time refining hit zones, which form the backbone of gameplay. It's also worth recalling poor Sean before we move forward. In our video regarding the compatibility character, we discussed Sean as something of a short-ranged Shoto, given his similar moveset to the famous franchise main characters, as well as his variant specials and supers. Though Dudley lacks the more distinctive move similarities, one can make a case for him as maybe a better Sean. Normal move frame data is an obvious place to start, but the jet upper is as close to the same as Ken's own anti-air Dragon Punch as one can get, and is easily superior to Sean's similar Dragon Smash. Dudley's taunt is effectively identical to Sean's as well, and has become integral to his corner pressure game over Third Strike's competitive life, not to mention its attack boosting stat bonus. It's not a fair comparison to call Dudley an actual short-range Shoto over Sean, but it's not far off. In fact, with Dudley's small jumping arc and command moves that are projectile invincible, you can even make a case that he's more of an anti-Shoto, maneuvering through his zone in game with ease and making fireball-happy players pay for them. A few key takeaways from Dudley before discussing his specials and supers are his jumping hard kick, which can slam an opponent to the ground, and 2 sweeps, a crouching medium kick for normal knockdowns, and the crouching hard kick, which is one of his juggle launching options. As the latter move has a low number in the game's under-the-hood juggle counting system, certain characters can be carried in the air multiple times by this move depending on their hurt box. Of real note is one of his overhead moves, the dart shot, performed with tward on the stick and hard kick. As techniques in this game go, this is a move with shorter startup than other such overheads and conspicuously low recovery time, making it easy to link other moves out of it if it lands on a crouching opponent. While not a true 50-50 scenario as the moves are technically reactable, the dart shot and his crouching hard kick are the cornerstones of Dudley's Oki game, especially if he has rivals pushed in the corner while they're on their back. So let's get to those special moves and discuss their uses, or in one case, lack thereof. The best place to start is the jet upper, an uppercut move used for both anti-air capabilities and as a combo ender. The strength of the button determines height, distance, and damage, and the amount of hits it inflicts, with an EX variant being the strongest. It can have unique juggle capability when used in certain combos, giving creative Dudley players lots of room for corner punishment. The ducking is one of his more unique moves. Essentially a dash command performed with a half circle forward and a kick, this move will shoot through projectiles when moving Dudley forward. Pressing either punch or kick will determine the ending move, either a long poke or a close uppercut. The short swing blow is similar, just moving him in the opposite direction. A juke backward before returning to the starting position has similar projectile invincibility and is often used as a fake out against downed opponents thinking they can pop up from the ground with an attack or throw. The EX version hits 3 times. Perhaps most important though is the machine gun blow. Basically an auto combo performed with a half circle forward and a punch, the strength of the button will determine how many punches Dudley throws. The EX version is the central component to Dudley play though. Adding an extra punch at the end to launch opponents, a Dudley player can turn this fast move into multitudes of juggle opportunities when combined with either the ducking punches or even the short swing. Many of these are matchup dependent, but you can find no end of flashy and damaging combo videos with this character on the internet, and they mostly start with this move. Though any variation of the machine gun is decidedly unsafe if blocked, the high risk, high reward can be mitigated if Dudley catches a player with a standing hard kick, which easily combos into the EX machine gun at any distance given its speed. a core component to his overall kit and arguably one of the best moves in the game. What definitely isn't though is the cross counter. This is a mix between Remy's Blue Nocturne super and a kind of come at me bro taunt that real life boxers love to employ. It's meant to take the force of an incoming attack and retaliate depending on the strength of the button or burning EX meter. Low attacks and throws beat this move. But even past that, this is a curious inclusion into a game with a complex parry system and is practically never seen in high-level play, outside of very rare occasions with the advanced Kara movement it can give. Its inclusion is odd considering that Dudley is a character adjusted considerably over the course of the 3 Street Fighter III games. The cross counter somehow has survived through New Generation, but Dudley was gifted the aforementioned extra target combos, starting with Second Impact, and also a diving attack in that game called the Thunderbolt. This move was removed from Third Strike, likely because it wasn't of much use to high-level Dudley players. The short swing blow essentially replaces it, which has much more utility. And speaking of utility, Dudley is yet another character on the roster with 2 pretty good super options and one that's decidedly great. However, even though the consensus is that his tournament play revolves around a singular choice, many Dudley players still bounce between a few supers. Super Art 1, the Rocket Upper, is that other option. Basically the same as Ken's Super 1 and Akuma's Super 2, this is a series of Dragon Punches for good damage at the cost of a medium-sized meter. Like the Shoto Supers, Dudley can stock 2 of them, which gives him a good amount of EX ammo to play with. Also, like those other 2 supers though, some hits can drop during specific combos and even anti-air scenarios if the opponent is coming at certain angles. It has a fast 2-frame startup though, meaning the dark shot linked into this move is viable. Super R2, the Rolling Thunder, is considered the worst of the 3, but still has a few things going for it. His nuclear super, he can only stock 1 Rolling Thunder with a large meter, so it tends to be an all-or-nothing option. Mashing the punch buttons will grant extra hits, not unlike Ken's Super 2, but it outputs heavy damage, is projectile invincible, and can chase down an opponent if all 3 punch buttons are held to activation. This move was toned down from his appearance in Second Impact from a damage perspective, but an interesting footnote about its appearance in that game, and New Generation, is that some contemporary strategy guides and videos incorrectly label this as the Dempsey Roll. This is a boxing maneuver pioneered by American champion Jack Dempsey in the early 1920s that began with what Dempsey himself described as a quote drop step and then quote trigger step before moving into a series of body blows. The term has become a favorite in boxing manga. Super Art 3 though is generally seen as the preferred Dudley super. The corkscrew blow is again comparable to Ken in his Super R3 in that they share 3 stocks with short meters, so there's plenty of EX to play with, a fast startup time that can combo out of piles of Dudley normals and specials, and favorable screen position for him to employ a tricky wake-up game. The strength of the button used can also dictate the distance Dudley travels during the attack. His expansive moveset makes him an unpredictable mix-up monster that can deal high damage in nearly every situation. He also comes loaded with one of the highest stun bars in the game, making him problematic against some of the stun-reliant characters like Makoto, Necro, and a Denjin Ryu. However, he's also the worst victim of on-the-ground combos that we'll see in the game, as a cornered throw can be linked into any Shoto's DP super. This generally isn't a problem though, since none of these are considered any of those characters' best supers, and a Dudley that quickstands immediately avoids this. Still, there's a feeling that he has a high bar to clear for new players learning to use him effectively, but when they do, they're always considered a tournament threat, and this character is often seen hovering in the mid to high tier of fan-made lists. But more than that, it's refreshing to see a design team take a good, hard look at their past and try to course correct. We've already seen that this isn't a universal design ethos, but reacting to an older character and evolving the bad perceptions that they themselves helped fuel is, at the very least, a good start. That takes guts.